All right, in this lesson, we're going to be going over Unit 1, Lesson 2, the theory of evolution by natural selection. If you're following along your book, this lesson starts on page 14. So the essential question that we're going to focus on today in this lesson is, what is the theory of evolution by natural selection? So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the role of genetic and environmental factors in the theory of evolution by natural selection. Okay, so the first thing we're going to cover is Darwin's Voyage. If you look on page 16, there's a map that explains Darwin's voyage, and what we're really concerned with is what Darwin observed. So we're going to cover the question, what did Darwin observe? Charles Darwin became a naturalist, a scientist who studies nature, during a voyage on the British ship the HMS Beagle. On his journey, Darwin observed and collected many living and fossil specimens. Darwin made his most important observations on the Galapagos Islands of South America. Darwin formed the theory of biological evolution using the observations that he had made during the almost 5-year journey. Evolution is the process by which populations change over time. Remember, a population is a group of the same organisms living in the same space. Population is all the individuals of species that live together in an area at the same time. A species, however, is a group of closely related organisms that can produce fertile offspring. Darwin collected birds from the Galapagos Islands and nearby islands. The birds on each island were different from the birds on the other islands, and all were different from the birds on the mainland. Darwin wondered if the birds had evolved from one species of finch. Darwin observed differences in beak size among finches from different islands. Many years later, scientists confirmed that these differences related to the bird's diet. If you would like visuals of these birds' beaks, you can look on page 17. Birds with shorter, heavier beaks could eat harder foods than those with thinner beaks could eat. If you turn to page 18, we're going to talk about some other ideas that influenced Darwin. Darwin was influenced by the ideas of many scientists. These ideas helped him develop his theory about how populations change over time. Farmers and breeders select plants or animals for breeding based on desired traits. This is called artificial selection. A trait is a form of an inherited characteristic. Traits can spread through populations. A trait could be you inherited brown eyes or blue eyes from your parents. Scientist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck thought that organisms could acquire and pass on traits that they needed to survive. He did not know that the acquired traits do not become part of the organism's DNA and therefore cannot be passed on to the offspring. Lamarck's idea that the organism's traits help them survive influenced Darwin's theory. Geologist Charles Lyell hypothesized that small changes in rocks have collected over hundreds of millions of years. Therefore, Darwin reasoned, if Earth were very old, there would be enough time for very small changes in life forms to add up. Darwin read an essay by Thomas Malthus that suggested that populations are limited by food resources, disease, competition, and predation. If you look here in the graph, we have quantity versus time. So for the human population, as time increases, the quantity increases. Notice that the food supply remains constant over time. Darwin reasoned that survivors probably have traits that help them survive. Darwin thought that some of these traits could be passed on from parent to offspring. So we're going to look at the 4 parts of natural selection. So I'm on page 20 in your textbook. Natural selection is the process by which organisms that inherit advantageous traits tend to reproduce more successfully. When a plant or animal reproduces, it usually makes more offspring than the environment can support. Therefore, only some of the organisms will successfully reproduce. So we're going to look at the 4 parts of natural selection. Within a species, there are natural differences, or called variations, in traits. Variations come from differences in genetic material. Genetic variations can be passed on from parent to offspring. An important source of a variation is a mutation, or a change in genetic material. As each new generation is produced, new genetic differences may be introduced into a population. In this way, genetic variation can increase in a population. The more genetic variation, the more likely that some individuals might have traits that would be advantageous if the environment changes. Advantageous meaning beneficial to that particular organism. Individuals try to get the resources that they need to survive, including food, water, space, and in most cases, mates for reproduction. Darwin reasoned that individuals with a particular trait are more likely to survive long enough to reproduce. As a result, the trait is, quote unquote, selected, becoming more common in the next generation of offspring. An adaptation is an inherited trait that helps an organism survive and reproduce in its environment. As natural selection repeats from generation to generation, these adaptations become more common, and new adaptations may arise. Over time, the population becomes better adapted to the environment. So how do these species change over time? If you're following with me, I'm on page 22 in your textbook. Adaptations are variations that help a species survive and reproduce. At first, adaptations are rare. As more of the species survive and reproduce, the number of individuals with the adaptation will increase. Other adaptations are inherited behaviors that help an organism find food, protect itself, or reproduce. Parents and offspring often have small differences in genetic material, but over many generations, these differences add up. These differences accumulate so that organisms alive now are often very different from their ancestors. So what happens to species as the environment changes? On page 23 in your text. All organisms have traits that allow them to survive in specific environments. If the environment changes, a species is more likely to survive if it has genetic variation, which results in a variation of traits. If no individuals have traits that help them survive and reproduce in the changed environment, and species will become extinct. Extinction occurs when all members of the species have died. Greater competition, new predators, and the loss of habitat are all examples of environmental changes that can lead to extinction. Because a natural disaster can destroy resources quickly, organisms may die no matter what adaptations they may have. The fossil record shows that many species